Okay guys, Keith here. It's time to do the fourth update video of the night. This time we're still talking about releases 2019.19 through 2019.32, but this time we're focusing on the changes to xSchedule, and we'll probably touch on a couple in xFade as well, given how long this video goes for. So the first couple relate to ArtNet triggers. Now, ArtNet triggers are a type of network packet defined in the ArtNet specification that allows you to send a trigger to a device to get it to do something. These have been introduced in two ways. One is if you add an advanced playlist, you can now come down and add an ArtNet trigger, and basically you get to specify the IP address, a thing called an OEM number, a key and a subkey. You can embed some data, and the delay obviously delays the sending of the event for a certain amount of time within the step. So that basically sends an ArtNet trigger packet out to a particular device which may do something interesting with it. Again, it's up to you, right? It depends on what you're doing. If you don't have anything that supports ArtNet triggers, you're probably skipping over this part of the video. In events, there is obviously the reverse. If you want xSchedule to listen for ArtNet triggers, you can create an ArtNet trigger here. Again, you get to specify the OEM number, the key and the subkey, and then you get to decide, using all the usual mechanisms, what it is that you want xSchedule to do when that trigger arrives. So both ends of the spectrum, right? The ability to send triggers to another device and the ability to bring or to receive a trigger. One of the things coming very soon in the next release of the Falcon firmware is the ability for the Falcon to actually send triggers using those little white input pins at the top right-hand side of the board. And so if you shorted those pins out, plug something in, put a switch or something, it will actually cause the Falcon to send a trigger, and you could have it send it to xSchedule and have xSchedule to do something based on what's received from that controller as an idea. So that's what those two are about. Okay, so this one here, it says it's a fix, but it's really an enhancement. So there's been a couple of changes to the API, reminding everyone who has maybe never bothered to, sorry, I should go to GitHub, who's never looked at the API definition. xSchedule has an extensive API that you can basically have a web page or a website or whatever trigger events, and they're all documented in this file here on GitHub. Inside the xSchedule folder, there's a file called API documentation, and it has all of the APIs fully documented in here. And there are some additional controls. In this case, it was a set mode, which basically allows you to where's the set mode? But basically, the set mode allows you to control whether or not it's in a master, whether xSchedule's running as master or remote, etc. So you can change the modes of xSchedule remotely from some external device. Moving SMS Daemon. So I've never actually, I promised to make a video on SMS Daemon and I never got around to it. So let me try and correct that for you. So SMS Daemon used to be a separate executable on Windows. It was always embedded into xSchedule, and it still is on the Mac version. On the Windows version, it's now a plugin. And plugins are basically, you can have many plugins. I've got two here. I've got a demo plugin, which is a plugin that I wrote in C#, which obviously only runs on Windows, but I built it as a proof of concept, and it's available inside the xLights source repository. If you go to GitHub and you go into the demo plugin here, all the C# files that you would need to build this plugin or this demo plugin are in here, and you can obviously customize this to to build your own plugin. The plugins have basically they can support web interfaces. They can even manipulate the pixel data when the show is running. So they actually receive a notification every frame and access to the buffer to actually set the data on pixels. So there's pretty much an unlimited array of things that you can do with plugins. So the SMS plugin is up here. If you basically check it, it's available. It comes available. You can't close it here, so please don't try. If you want to disable it, you need to come up here and unselect it, and it goes away. It's not coming back. The SMS plugin is basically a bridge between an online or an internet-based SMS service, which is basically a mobile phone number that people can text message, and xSchedule, or in this case the SMS daemon, can go out to that service, download the text messages, and in this case actually put it onto a matrix in your display. And the ways in which that works is you would need to have one of these matrices defined. So you would have to describe your matrix. Let's have our 50 string, 50 long, 1 strand per string, start channel. Let's start it in the top left. In fact, let's assume it's actually a 64 by 64 P10 panel, because that's kind of how you would describe it. And the orientation would be horizontal. Start channel, oh, it's not going to let me. It's saying start channel 1's invalid, and the reason for that is because down here I don't have an xLights folder. So one of the other changes up here is I can switch to my xLights folder. Yeah, no. All right, so I'm back in my xLights folder, and I can come up and we'll go back to matrices. We'll add one. We'll call it M. What do we say it was? 64 by 64, strands per string 1, start channel 1. We'll put it up in the top left, and it's horizontal. It's all good. It's all good. We'll save it. And now we can go back to our SMS daemon, and the first thing that we need to do is we need to go into our options. I do need to take away that show folder option. That shouldn't be there anymore. Target text items. Okay, so before we do that, let's come back here. Let's create a playlist, add a playlist. Yeah, okay, let's actually edit it in advanced mode. Because one of the things we need is we need a text element to actually put our text messages onto. So we add a text element in here. It's pointing to matrix M. That's correct. The format here should be %text, because that will display the text on it. We get to decide. We're going to leave it in white. That looks fine. Overwrite if black, blah, blah, blah. That will do. Oh, let's make this run for, I don't know, 60 seconds. Okay, we'll save that just for the sake of, let's create a virtual matrix. We'll add that, give it a name. This one's going to be 64 by 64, because it's got to match our other matrix. No rotation, start channel 1, looks good, looks good. We'll save that. So if we play this sequence, of course, there's no data. Those pink cells up there are actually being inserted by that plugin, just so you know that the plugin's working. The other plugin's working. Oh, that plugin. Oh, that's interesting. The plugin shouldn't be working. All right. So now we go up and we go edit options. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to target the text items to the text item, which was unnamed. I forgot to give it a name, but that's okay. We'll call it unnamed. I think that will work. You would then choose a service, which would be one of these three, Bandwidth, Twilio, or VoIP.ms. You choose the appropriate one. You'll need to go and sign up with them. You'll need to get a phone number. You'll have to pay your money. It's typically well, the amount varies depending on the service that you sign up with and where in the world you are. Down here, it's about $15 a month to do. The message retrieval interval is how frequently you want this plugin to go to the service and download all the latest text messages. So the shorter that is, the more frequently it goes back to the internet and downloads the messages. Obviously, the larger the number, the less often it goes back. The display duration is how long each message is placed onto the matrix. These options here are going to vary depending on the service you sign up with, and are basically the various identifiers that you receive from that service to validate the API call. You can then put in your phone number here, which is the phone number that you've been assigned by the vendor. This is the phone number which any responses that you may choose to send to people texting your display will come from. And obviously it needs to be your service. If you can put that number there, as long as you don't put anything in the success response or reject response down here, it won't actually send any messages back to the people. So leave these blank if you don't want to send messages. I think you do have to put the phone number in though. Pergo Malum is an online profanity filter. Basically, if you check this checkbox, every message that's received will be passed off to Pergo Malum and scanned to see whether there's any bad words or whatever in it. It's not perfect. It's not that hard to get past it, but look, it's better than a poking eye with a blunt stick. You can choose to either reject messages or just blank out the profanity in messages and display them without the profanity. You can also have a local blacklist where you can add additional words that you would like to not allow onto your display. If you wanted to, just for instance, to display, I don't know, someone's first name, so they could text you their name and put it up on your tree or your matrix, you can use a local whitelist, which is a list of words that it will allow through. And in fact, the install includes a whitelist which contains thousands and thousands of first names if that's what you're doing. And you can also have a phone blacklist where you blacklist any phone numbers that you do not want to allow to text. So if you've got a particular troublemaker and you just want to ban them and never see their messages again, you can just put them into the file and ban them. The maximum message length is the maximum message size that it will accept. You can choose to ignore those oversized messages, or it will just truncate them to that size. You can also say here one word only, which means it will only accept messages which contain just a single word. Great if you're just receiving names. And display in uppercase if you want to force all messages to be displayed in uppercase, particularly useful if you're using something like icicles to display your messages on, and lowercase characters don't look great. Now, it will support emoji characters to the degree that it can, so you feel free to let your users include those. The maximum message age in minutes, so whenever the plugin kicks off, it goes off and it tries to download the messages. This is the maximum age that a message can be retrieved from the server and still be considered a current message that you might want to display on your display. You would want to set this to be roughly the longest amount of time that you would expect someone to stay at your display. I wouldn't set this number too large. One of the downsides of this number is if you shut down xSchedule for some reason, when it restarts, it will go back and get all the messages going back this many minutes, and it will start to replay them all again. So be careful what you set this number to. It also, having done that, it will also resend any services responses as well. So they'll get another text message saying, hey, we got your message, etc. So yeah, don't set this number too high. And there's the maximum message age for response. So you can set this to even smaller. So I would set this to be something like 1 or 2 times the message retrieval interval. And that, again, stops you sending too many responses to people, particularly in a situation where you do a restart. Times to display is the number of times to display a message before discarding it. Basically, it will display the oldest message with the least amount of displays first. So the freshest messages always get up, but if then people don't send messages to you for a while, it will recycle through things, and then eventually it will bottom out and it will put up your default message, whatever you choose that to be. So that's kind of how it works. Without signing up to a service, you can test it. You can come up here and do an insert test messages. So when you do that, you should be able to insert test messages, and it will add them into the display here, which you can then test and see whether they appear correctly on your show. So that's the SMS plugin. Delay to the text item. So yeah, this was a quirk. Previously, there was not a delay here. You couldn't set a delay and say, I don't want to display this until a certain distance into a step. And so that's been remediated and added back in. The force local IP, in the options here, you can now force the xSchedule to use a particular network adapter to send the data out if the default's not working well. Typically only required if you're using multicast and you're having trouble getting the data to go out the right network card, you can use that option. Clone xSchedule playlists and steps. So you can now, there's now an option down here to clone playlist. You can also come in here and clone a step or clone a playlist item, just to make it a little bit quicker to set things up, and then you can drag and drop things around. Set position and set step position. Having already looked in the API documentation and found that things weren't what I expected, I'm a little hesitant to do this, but because I'm pretty sure it's not going to be here now, and I'm not sure why. Oh, there it is. No, there it is. So here it is here. So you can basically advance forward or backwards in position within the current step by n seconds. So it basically allows you to move backwards or forwards within the current step. So if you want to jump back to the beginning of the song, or you want to jump forward 10 seconds or whatever, that API in theory lets you do that. Allow xSchedule to access more than one MIDI device at once. Yeah, this is a little technical, but basically particularly noticeable if you had events and you did a MIDI. Now you can actually specify, whoops, that was my battery complaining. Now you can specify which MIDI adapter. So if you have 2 or 3 MIDI adapters and you're using them and you want to trigger off different events, you can now set that here and control which MIDI events are connected where. Now I'm on the clock because I'm running out of power. In the MIDI events, okay, there's some big changes actually while I'm talking about MIDI events. This again is in a 33 sort of thing, but within MIDI you now have lots of control over how you handle things like the values of data 1 and data 2, which gives you much finer grained control over when a MIDI event triggers. And while we're in here, I'll mention MQTT. So you can now have xSchedule listen for MQTT events and trigger off those. And of course, as you would expect, you can also, in your playlist items over here, you can add an MQTT, you put in the topic, you put your broker in, the port's typically that, and you can include any data that you want to include, and you can send an MQTT event to your MQTT broker and trigger who knows what. Maybe you want to turn your outside lights off or something. And static and dynamic PS, so that one relates to RDS. It doesn't look any difference here, but you can now include station names that go up to about 72 characters. If it's less than 8 characters, it'll display a static name. If it's more than 8 characters, it'll use the dynamic PS and display the station using the dynamic option. Very, very quickly. There's been a couple of changes to xFade. Similar to xSchedule, you can now use multiple MIDI controllers with xFade at once. It used to be you could only use the one. And you also now have the ability to connect xFade up to xLights on different computers, whereas previously they all had to be on the same computer, but you can now connect over the network to an xLights running on a different machine. And that's it. That's xSchedule and xFade, and that's it for my updates. So thank you very much, guys.